The Wallace Whistleblower, a short story. 18 years on the job at Wallace Manufacturing, running the stamping machines. 18 years breathing in that factory air, a mix of hot metal and oil that's stuck in your nose. 18 years of the machines clanging in a steady rhythm, like my own heartbeat. From my spot on the factory floor, I could see rows of powerful machines and drills with robot arms moving in smooth arcs. Each cycle ended with a whoosh of air, like a sigh of relief from the machine. I couldn't even guess how many millions of parts came out of this place. Pieces from all different jobs came together to make things like appliances, car parts, all sorts of stuff. It was amazing what you could start with. Just cut, bent, stamped, and drilled metal scraps. My hands, roughened by years of work, fit perfectly on the controls I knew so well. The stamped numbers on the machine were as familiar as the lines on my own knuckles. Punch, move the metal in, do it again. These motions were as natural as breathing. This factory was my life, my job from when I was young all the way till now. The constant work on the assembly line wasn't just about the paycheck. It gave a sense of order and purpose to this tough part of western Pennsylvania, a place hit hard by factory closures. Every breath I took working at Wallace felt like it helped the whole town stay alive. Good wages, protection from the union, benefits that kept families going and gave people in Southbrook a shot at a middle-class life. I believed in everything the company promised. I loved the idea of a good life for folks who were willing to work hard on the factory floor. Loyalty was a big deal here. It was like being a good citizen in a town that lived or died based on how well Wallace was doing. The first sign of trouble was so small, I almost missed it altogether. Mark was just a young man, barely 19, new to the job and full of enthusiasm. He was still pretty lanky, hadn't filled out yet. Then, during the night shift, a robot malfunctioned and yanked his shoulder right out of its socket. Management said it was a one-time thing, that Mark made a mistake because he was new. They took him off the line and downplayed the whole thing in their report. At the time, I brushed off my worries. Accidents happen, even in a safe place like Wallace. I figured Mark would heal up and come back stronger, a true part of the Wallace team. But then there were more accidents. It wasn't just random bad luck anymore. Sarah Traeger, a tough woman in her 40s who loved the energy of the night shift, got hurt bad when a tank of chemicals leaked. I saw her scream in pain. It cut through all the factory noise. The leak burned her skin badly. It ate away at her arm from a cleaning solution they used for aluminum. The burn looked awful, like a scary map on her chest and shoulder. Her supervisor looked into it, like they had to by law. But it felt like they just went through the motions. The company doctor, who seemed more interested in company rules than actually helping people, said everything was okay and no one was really to blame. They pressured Sarah to sign a report that downplayed the whole thing and made it seem like the company wasn't at fault. I couldn't get the image of her injury out of my head. It stuck with me like a wound that wouldn't heal. I started to question things. I didn't want to be seen as someone who was causing trouble for the company that gave me a good job and supported my family. But the more I thought about it, the more worried I became. I wanted to talk to someone else who felt the same way. That's when I thought of Ben Butterfield again. Ben used to be a real fighter for worker safety and rights. They called him Blue Collar Norma Ray because he spoke out like she did in that movie. Before I started working at Wallace, Ben almost led a strike because the air quality was bad in the foundry. He almost got everyone to walk out, but management shut it down. They punished him for causing trouble and made things really difficult for him until he gave up trying to fight for change. The Ben I knew now wasn't the same. He didn't try to convince people to fight for better working conditions like he used to. Older workers would tell stories about how Ben used to be a real leader. They said he would block people from coming to work, hold signs outside the factory, and yell through a microphone to get people to listen. He just wanted to make sure everyone was safe and that the company cared about its workers, not just making money. Now, Ben kept to himself and didn't want anyone to think he was causing trouble. He was like a lone wolf who had been out in the cold for too long and forgot what it felt like to be a part of a team. One cold morning, I waited for Ben by his welding station after his shift ended. I didn't say anything. I just showed him a picture I took. It was a close-up of Sarah's burned arm, really detailed and awful to look at. Ben stared at the picture, his eyes filled with anger. He let out a long breath and clenched the picture in his hand. Her husband died here 8 months ago from breathing in bad air, and now this? He said. We both knew complaining to the company wouldn't work. They would downplay the problems and find a way to punish anyone who spoke up. Ben wasn't willing to fight the company anymore, but since I was, he agreed to help. We started working together in secret to gather evidence. We took pictures of things that shouldn't be happening at the factory and secretly recorded conversations. We also looked through company documents to see if we could find anything else. We kept track of every accident and violation, writing everything down in a big notebook. We didn't tell anyone what we were doing because we didn't want to get in trouble. The more evidence we collected, the more worried I felt. It felt wrong to go against the company that gave me a good job, but I also knew it wasn't right for them to ignore how badly people were getting hurt. My wife and kids depended on my paycheck from Wallace. My kids were going to college soon, and it would be really hard to afford everything on just one income. But then I also worried about what would happen to our town. Southbrook has been a small town built around Wallace for over 100 years. If the factory shut down, it would be a disaster. People would lose their jobs, and the whole town could turn into a ghost town. No one would have any money, and people would have to move away. It would be terrible for everyone. We used to be proud of what we made at Wallace, parts for cars, appliances, and other things America needed. Now, I felt stuck between doing the right thing and ruining everything for everyone in town. Every time someone else got hurt, I got angrier. The pictures I took and the reports I read made me even more determined to do something. The worst was Sarah's injury. It was so awful I couldn't forget it. Then the worst happened. There was an accident at another Wallace factory in a nearby town called Logan. A young machinist named Cullen Brooks died because of a leak and because they didn't give the workers the right safety equipment. The news was everywhere. Those of us who knew what was really going on couldn't take it anymore. Another man died because the company cared more about saving money than keeping their workers safe. That's when I decided to do something. I sent all the evidence I had anonymously to Amelia Oakes, a reporter at the local newspaper who was known for looking into important stories. She was thrilled to get my information and asked me a lot of questions to make sure it was all true. She was so excited. It was like she'd been looking for this story for a long time. Finally, Amelia's investigation into Wallace was published on the front page of the newspaper. It included everything I had sent her, reports from the factory, information about how many times the company had been fined for safety violations, and even interviews with doctors and former employees. The article showed that the company wasn't following safety rules and was putting profits ahead of their workers' well-being. For a long time, people in Southbrook just trusted Wallace because it was the only big company in town. But this article made it clear that the company wasn't looking out for its employees. The whole town of Southbrook exploded in anger. People protested outside the Wallace factory, carrying signs that said the company was corrupt and greedy. Government officials started investigating Wallace to see if they had broken any laws. They could face huge fines and even criminal charges. Lawyers who specialized in work injuries showed up too, wanting to sue Wallace on behalf of all the workers who got hurt. People who had been hurt at the factory, like Sarah Trager and the family of Cullen Brooks, were some of the most vocal critics. Even some people who still worked at Wallace joined the protest, feeling braver now that the truth was out. The factory started to slow down. Managers seemed scared and weren't giving workers clear instructions. Workers were angry that they had been lied to, and they wanted some of the managers to be fired. They were worried Wallace might try to punish them for speaking out. I didn't say much, but I watched everything unfold. I was worried that I might lose my job or even get in trouble for leaking the information. What would happen next? Would Wallace be able to fix things, or would the factory have to close? Then the layoffs started. Everyone knew why. The factory had to cut costs because of the lawsuit and the fines they might have to pay. They said they were laying people off based on who had worked there the longest, but some people thought they were just trying to fire the ones who might cause trouble. I watched in shock as managers told people they didn't have jobs anymore. These were people who had worked there for years, some even for decades. They were all ages, from young guys in their 20s to people in their 60s who were ready to retire anyway. They were just handed a piece of paper saying they were fired and told to leave. The company offered some help to some people who were laid off, but others were just left on their own. Wallace was trying to save money by getting rid of as many workers as possible before they had to pay all the fines and the legal fees. They didn't seem to care about the people who were losing their jobs. One of the first people laid off was Ben. It wasn't a surprise because he had spoken out against the company before. A manager and a security guard walked him to his locker and made him take all his stuff out. When I saw Ben get escorted out, yelling insults at the managers, I felt a wave of guilt mixed with fear. I worried that I had caused all this trouble by leaking the information. Some people yelled at Ben too, but for different reasons. Some were mad at the company and agreed with what he was saying. Others were just happy he was getting fired because they thought it would keep them from losing their jobs. I didn't say anything during the layoffs. I thought maybe after things calmed down, Ben and I could talk about what happened. We could figure out if it was better to speak out about what was wrong, even if it meant people might lose their jobs, or to just keep quiet and try to keep your job. Every day at work, I worried I would be next. I kept having nightmares about being fired and kicked out of the factory. It seemed like Wallace was trying to lay off as many people as possible to save money. I tried not to get paranoid, but I kept looking over my shoulder all the time, worried that someone from HR or security was coming to get me. So even though I knew it might happen, I was still surprised when they finally came to fire me. 2 managers and a big boss from another part of the company stood silently in the doorway, looking serious. I couldn't tell if they were there for a regular meeting or to fire me. One of the managers spoke up, trying to sound friendly. "John, can you come with us for a quick talk?" I didn't argue or ask questions. I just got up and followed them down the hall to the HR offices. There were a lot of empty desks now, from all the layoffs. They took me into a plain conference room that probably hadn't been decorated in years. We all sat down at a big oval table. The room felt cold and uncomfortable. The big boss put his hands on the table and started talking. John, as you know, the past few months have been really tough for Wallace. There have been a lot of bad news stories, and we've had to lay some people off. I won't waste your time explaining everything. It sounded like they were going to fire me. You've worked here for a long time, and we appreciate that. We've always tried to be a good company for this town. But things are bad right now, and we have to make some tough decisions to keep the factory running. I felt a rush of anger. Of course they were going to talk about how they were just trying to help the town and get the factory back on track. They wouldn't take any blame for all the safety problems, especially not for whoever leaked all that information. The big boss kept talking. Because of everything that's happened, we have to lay off some more people, not just rule breakers. I tried to figure out if they were talking about me specifically, but it didn't sound good either way. We know this is a difficult time for everyone, and we don't want to make things any harder for you. You'll get a severance package, which is basically money to help you get by while you look for a new job. I could practically see the whole conversation laid out in front of me like a script. It was clear they were firing me. Wait a minute, I said, my voice tight. Are you saying... Mr. Smith, the manager interrupted, we're letting you go from Wallace Manufacturing. At least they didn't make me wait any longer. Even though I felt awful about losing my job, I also felt a strange sense of relief. I didn't have to worry anymore about being fired. It was a weird feeling, but in a way, I felt free. I stood up without saying anything. There was nothing else to say. The big boss and the managers didn't try to stop me from leaving. They just watched me go. It felt almost ceremonial, like they were kicking me out for good. They took my ID badge and made me give them back everything I had in my locker. I took one last look at the factory floor, which seemed quiet and still. It felt like everything had stopped. The managers wasted no time making sure I couldn't get back in. It was a cold reminder that I was just one small part of a big machine, and they could easily replace me. As I walked out of the factory, everyone stopped what they were doing and stared at me. Some people looked away, embarrassed. Others mumbled that they were sorry. A few looked angry at me, like I'd caused all the trouble. I wanted to yell and tell them it wasn't my fault, that I was just trying to help everyone by exposing the safety problems. But I knew it wouldn't do any good. They were just trying to save their own jobs. Everything had gotten out of control. It wasn't about who was right or wrong anymore. It was about everyone looking out for themselves. So I just left without saying anything. I was just another worker out of thousands who had come and gone through those factory doors. There were no goodbyes or celebrations, just me walking out with a cardboard box in my hand. Outside, the wind blew through the trees, and it felt like winter would never end. Even though it was almost spring, everything felt cold and dead. As I walked away, a deep sadness overcame me. The comforting hum of machines that used to echo through my system was gone. Leaving the job felt worse than I ever imagined. 18 years, more than half the time I'd been awake, spent keeping the machines running, making sure things went smoothly, and paying the bills. What was it all for, besides putting food on the table? Management cared more about profits than worker safety, and they seemed to get away with it every time. Now I was out on the street with no goodbye or recognition. It felt like giving up a fight against a broken system, a fight I was destined to lose. Wallace Manufacturing kept running, sure that people would soon forget enough once the news stopped talking about it. They put in new bosses and make some changes to look good, but nothing would really be fixed. The silence was deafening. The steady sound of the machines was replaced by a hollow emptiness. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories.